Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, I continue my series on BattleTech with part 2 of the history section. This week, I am focusing on the Star League itself, the golden age that never was. Because, while compared to the succession wars after and the Age of War before, the Star League era was more peaceful, it was not an era of peace. Despite the technological progression, the advanced tech of the Star League era from House Cameron that was doled out on a much delayed time frame to the rest of the Inner Sphere, it wasn't really any more prosperous than any other era. It was just more technologically advanced. And with that, let me just say, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the Star League. Before I begin talking about the Star League itself, I need to go over just a quick overview of the political powers in the Inner Sphere and Periphery. In the center of everything was the Terran hegemony, led by House Cameron. This was the major technologically advanced power in the Inner Sphere. They had one of the best counterintelligence agencies, so attempts to spy on them and steal their tech didn't work very well. That's why it was very, very hard for the other houses to get mechs after the Terran hegemony developed them. To the south is the Capellan Confederation. This was originally founded by a merchant alliance trying to basically keep things safe for their different groups, and it eventually formed into its own military power, and it's always been the smallest of the powers, though by this point it's between the Age of War losses and various cedings via treaty, it's the smallest of the great houses. It would eventually develop a doctrine of defense based on would have worlds that were set to react to worlds within a short distance from them, and it would let a world be invaded. Let several worlds be invaded, in fact, so they could evaluate the strength of the invasion and know what forces to send and how many. And this would lead to very interesting doctrines later on in the history of the Capellan Confederation. But they basically relied on a principle of adaptive defense. Then up from there, we have the Free Worlds League, if you're heading on the galactic map to the left. Free Worlds League was a bunch of individual states that ostensibly elected their leader from by their parliament, but that leader was almost always American. And the big thing is, the Free Worlds League, its individual states don't really get along well with each other, but they're sort of like siblings. They don't necessarily like each other, but you meddle in their fights, they're gonna stop, turn, beat on you, then get back to fighting each other. The hobby of the average Free Worlds League government is civil war. Yeah, Free World League is interesting. Continuing to the left, continuing clockwise around our inner sphere map, we have the Lyran Alliance at this point, House Steiner. They were merchants. I mean, while Liao was formed by a group of merchant houses bent on survival, the Lyrans were founded by the alliance of merchant houses for the purpose of raw capitalism. And they're very good at it. They would be plagued by the concept called social generals. Generals who got their positions not because of skill on the battlefield, but because of being able to buy their commissions, or being able to use political clout to leverage their commissions. This would always be a issue with Steiner, but they had the advantage that once they started making mechs, they always had the money to make the biggest and best mechs. There's a sort of joke. What do you call a Zeus, a Banshee, a Cyclops, and a Commando? A Lyran Recon mech. A Lyran Recon Lance. And the Commando's just there because they need someone to go a little bit faster than the assaults. Continuing to the left, again, continuing clockwise, we come into the Draconis Combine. So you're going to notice a trend here. The Draconis Combine was, again, a merchant and manufacturing alliance. And in this case, it's sort of like, well, there was this old movie from the 80s called Gung Ho. It was about a Japanese company taking over an American car making plant, and the sort of off way it handled Japanese culture interacting with Americans. That's kind of what they did for the early Draconis Combine. Eventually, it would take a more westernized, idealized look and concepts about the Japanese into it, but again, it was based heavily on stereotypes from the 80s. So, take that as you will. And then, the last of the 5 great houses, continuing down clockwise, is the Federated Sons, or House d'Avion. House d'Avion are French in origin. And yet they do succeed a lot in battles. They, in essence, generally get the fiat shield of the setting. I.e., they tend to succeed at what they attempt to do. And those were the 6 great houses that made up the Star League. These were called the Inner Sphere, and really the reason why they were called the Inner Sphere is because when you look at intergalactic trade, or interstellar trade, these were all the worlds that were most able to be trading with the area around Terra. of the Terran hegemony. And because of this, they were able to keep up a higher standard of technology than the areas around in the periphery. Now, in the periphery, you had a number of major periphery states. The Outworlds Alliance, which was basically formed by people who didn't really like all the advanced technology and wanted a simpler way of life. And so, on one hand, they were a very agrarian culture. On the other hand, they would produce some of the best aerospace pilots and fighters in between the inner and periphery. In fact, the Star League itself, the pinnacle of human knowledge and training and everything like that, would send pilots to the Outworlds Alliance Victoria Academy to learn how to dogfight. The Torian Concordat, off of the Davian Liao, Davian Compelled Confederation border, their big claim to fame is they have nukes, they're not afraid to use them. They see the asteroid belts around their main planets with nuclear silos and stuff like that. They never signed the Ares Conventions, and so they weren't really that nice people to deal with. And oh yeah, they had a hate-on for Davian. Off of the Capellan Free Worlds League border, you have the Magistracy of Canopus. All important positions from in the nobility on down are held by women in the Magistracy of Canopus. And oh yeah, commissions are bought. But it's sort of like, yes, you buy your commissions, but if you're good, a noble's going to slip you the money to buy your commission. Maybe slip you the money to buy a commission at a higher rank. And strangely, of all the periphery nations, the Magistracy was the most effective militarily, really. But that's because, well, they have a reputation as a hedonistic society. And that reputation is not undeserved. And then this society no longer exists. It dies with the Star League. But along the Lyran border, all the way to the Combine border, along that periphery edge, was the Rimworld's Republic. The Rimworld's Republic, its big thing was guile and sneaky stabbiness. They never really did anything openly. They just tended to do assassinations and murders to get things done. Although they did have a military that was, strangely, on a par with the Star League. A little bit below. But this is because they kind of sold out to the Terran hegemony early on. And with that, you have an idea of the layout going into the Star League era. this is what we're looking at, and this is what we're going to be dealing with. So let's continue on to our discussion of the Star League. Someone unfamiliar with BattleTech is probably going to be wondering, why did I just go into the overlay of the major inner sphere powers and the major periphery powers? Well, those play some major roles. You see, one of the first things Ian Cameron does. The Star League's been in existence for 4 years, and in 2575, he issues the Pollux Proclamation. What this is it's pretty much a statement that he's going to bring all of humanity under the banner of the Star League by force if necessary. Now, of course, the great powers of the inner sphere, the great houses, they've already signed the Star League Charter. The Star League exists now. The Rimworld's Republic does actually take the peaceful solution. The other major periphery powers don't. And this leads to the Re-Unification Wars. Ian Cameron sends the might of the Star League out. And their purpose is to subdue the rebellious major periphery powers. This is not a good thing. This turns out, in fact, to be a very bad thing. The Majesty of Canopus, they're interesting how they deal with it. Some worlds, they fight the Star League tooth and nail. Military forces clashing and giving the Star League a bloody nose. Some worlds, however, how the Majesty deals with those is they don't fight at all. In fact, they welcome, at least the women do, they welcome the Star League Defense Force with open arms and open beds, and then kill them in their sleep. The Outworlds Alliance, oh gods. Let's just say the Outworlds Alliance will always remember how the Star League comported themselves. Or should I say, how the Cretan troops that the Star League sent to subdue the Outworlds Alliance treated them. Remember, this was the 80s stereotypes. So, the methods used by the Combine tended to be scorched earth. Fire starters were a very popular mech because they could burn down whole villages. And yes, the Outworlds Alliance was brutally subdued. Which brings us to the Taurian Concordat. This was the bloodiest theater of the Reunification Wars. The Star League, having come from the Age of War, was not prepared to deal with a force that didn't care about the Ares conventions. The Star League, when they made planetfall, would have to fight street by street to subdue a planet. That's assuming that they even made it to the planet. They lost a large number of warships to space-deployed nuclear weapons. They lost forces on the ground to tactical nuclear weapons used against them. They dealt with chemical and biological weapons being fired at their campsites. The Taurian Concordat was willing to do whatever it took to stop the Star League. They eventually submitted, but not really. They were kind of never really under the Star League's rule. They never really got any of the benefits. And that's the thing. Once nations submitted, were subjugated, they would reap the benefits of Star League membership. You would have the Star League Corps of Engineers coming out and helping to clean up the damage that they did to some planets, mind you, but also terraforming planets. You have to remember, the Star League practically greened Mars and started terraforming Venus. In fact, it was not until way later that the atmosphere plants that were put on Venus broke down and nobody could repair them. But that's the thing. The Star League did do good works. It is because of them that the Magistracy of Canopus world of Detroit is a major manufacturing world, on a par with one of the worlds of any of the great houses, because that was a Star League factory that was built on Detroit. Now, the RimWorld's Republic didn't have a case of needing to be militarily suppressed, but the Star League Defense Forces did come in and occupy it due to riots and insurrections. These might have been fomented by the Amaris family, or they might have been people who didn't like the Amaris family, or both. Either way, the SLDF came in and put down the riots. This would be important later on, because much later on, in the 2750 era, this is going to be used by the Amaris family as they begin doing some other work. But one of the things we have during this period is, after the Reunification Wars are over, and these took about 20 years, after the Reunification Wars are over, we do enter into this relatively peaceful era. There are border skirmishes. There are always border skirmishes. There are pirate bands and things like that. But there are always pirate bands and things like that in BattleTech. Because space is big, and it's always easy to find an asteroid or a small planet that no one's using, and then you just set up a base there. And that would always be an issue. But as we come to the later stages of the Star League, we end up with something called the Ronin Wars. This is around Star League bases in the Draconis Combine. And what would basically happen is a single mech warrior would come out to one of the Star League bases and challenge that base to send out a mech warrior for a duel. And in most cases, the Combine warrior would win. And the issues of this led to the creation of a special elite program for Star League mech warriors called the Gunslinger Program. They would take a good or exceptional mech warrior and make them better. They would give them advanced training in dueling. They'd give them the freedom to customize their mech. And they'd give them training on psychological warfare. All this stuff. And any mech warrior who completed the Gunslinger Program was allowed to have painted on their mech a pair of crossed dueling pistols. Or crossed pistols in general. And one of the graduates of the Gunslinger Program is an individual who will become much more well known later in life. An individual by the name of Alexander Kerensky. And he won a duel. It was a major duel, but it was enough to get him noticed by the higher-ups. And eventually he would become a general. And then the commander-in-chief of the Star League Defense Force. Alexander Kerensky was an important figure because, well, the periphery never really settled down. And Stefan Amaris would eventually set things up. He would start the periphery into a state of revolt again. And this revolt would pull Kerensky and the Star League Defense Force away from Terra. And next week, I'm going to talk about the fall of the Star League. Because this video would just be too long if I did it all this week. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.